If there's a country that symbolizes economic success, it must be Switzerland. I mean, there is a reason why we call other countries Switzerland of the Middle East or Switzerland of South America. And that's because for centuries, it has been one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And it managed to remain at the very top until today, thanks to its unique economic model. But while most people still haven't noticed, the truth is that this model is facing more and more problems. The world has changed, and what worked for Switzerland for so long is not working anymore. And for the first time in history, the future of the Switzerland's economic model is in serious trouble. But to understand why it's in trouble, we first need to explain what made Switzerland so wealthy in the first place. And while there is a popular idea that it was the Second World War and hiding Nazi gold, that is incorrect. Because while the story about Nazi gold is true, Switzerland was actually already rich way before that. The real story of the Swiss wealth begins in the mid-19th century. Before that, Switzerland as a state didn't really exist, and instead it was a loose confederacy of relatively poor mini regions, constantly fighting with each other. But in 1848, Switzerland was established as a unified state, and soon after, it turned from a simple rural country to one of the most developed economies in the world, because of two things. First, immediately after Switzerland became an actual country, it started building railways, connecting the different regions. Suddenly, many small companies spread around the country were able to grow at a much higher pace, and Switzerland went through a boom of industrialization in everything from pharmaceuticals, machinery, and luxury watches. And since Switzerland was still a small market, the new companies were forced to aggressively expand abroad, and over time they managed to grow into global giants, many of whom are still around today. And second, the Swiss banking industry was born, and pretty much since the start, it was an immediate hit, thanks to one thing that made the Swiss banks different from banks anywhere else: the practice of what's called banking secrecy. Swiss banks committed to never disclosing any information about their clients, including who they are or what accounts they have, to any corporation, government, or law enforcement agency. And once Switzerland finally became a unified country with its own currency, stable political system, and the official policy of neutrality, it quickly became a very attractive place for many wealthy individuals to store their money. And over the coming decades, its popularity grew. Large Swiss banks like Credit Suisse and UBS were formed. Swiss bankers were going around Europe promoting banking secrecy. And while Europe was going through wars and instability, Switzerland remained a stable, neutral country where a breach of the banking secrecy became a federal crime. As a natural result, Switzerland became the place for wealthy people from all over the world to store their money, and the Swiss banks made insane profits from providing that service, turning Switzerland into one of the richest countries in the world, with its banking system as the backbone of its economy. But this model that worked for so long is not really working anymore, and here's why. But first, I want to talk about a sponsor of this video, Skillshare. You might know Skillshare as the service that helps you learn skills like photography or illustration, but Skillshare also has hundreds of classes that teach you how to build a career in the creative industry. Personally, I learned all my editing and animation skills, which I use every day, on Skillshare, and now I'm exploring their courses made by some of my favorite creators like Ali Abdaal and MKBHD on other fundamentals of running a YouTube channel, like building a personal brand and turning a side hustle into a real business. Skillshare is offering 1 month free to any of my viewers that use the link in the description box, but for the month of April only, they are running an even better offer. If you're ready to start learning today with Skillshare, you can get 40% off your first year using my link. You can find both links down below so you can choose the best offer for you. And let's continue. The fact is that things have really been going downhill for the Swiss banking industry for a while now. Very slowly at first, but recently their problems have been growing bigger and bigger. It all started in the US, in the aftermath of the economic crisis of 2008. In the same year, when the US economy was hit by a major financial crisis, Barack Obama won the presidential election on, among others, the campaign claim that everyone needs to pay their dues, and that the government needs to crack down on wealthy Americans that are avoiding paying their taxes. And he specifically named Switzerland and Swiss banks with their secret accounts as the culprits that make this tax evasion possible. Once he assumed office, Switzerland found itself under an ever-increasing pressure from the US government to breach its centuries-long tradition of banking secrecy and hand over the information about their American clients, something that was actually against the Swiss law. But even though Switzerland fought tooth and nail against it, there's only as much that you can do when the most powerful country in the world really wants something from you. And as it happens, tax revenue is a pretty important motivation for the US government. And when the US was joined by the European Union, Switzerland found out that there's not much it can do. And rather than facing gigantic fines and sanctions, Swiss banks backed down. And since 2008, they went from not giving any information to anyone to providing information about their clients from the EU and the US to their respective governments every year. So while formally the banking secrecy still applies, in reality the practice no longer exists. And if you're an American or a European citizen, putting your money in a Swiss bank account is not any more secret than doing it in your own country. And that is naturally very bad news for Switzerland, since the centuries-long tradition which made the Swiss banks so famous and so attractive disappeared in less than a decade. And every year, the Swiss banks are forced to open up more and more. In order to save their clientele, and at least some of its appeal, the Swiss banks tried to change their value proposition. If they can't offer secrecy anymore, they double down on the offer of stability. You might no longer be able to hide your money from your own government in Switzerland, but at least you know that they are safe. After all, banks do fall every now and then, and the new marketing strategy for the country was to say that unlike in the US or the EU, the Swiss banks are a bastion of stability, safety, and security, where you can store your money without being afraid of what's going to happen with them. Except that's no longer really true either. In March this year, Credit Suisse, the second largest Swiss bank with 50,000 employees and more than 150 years of history, found itself on the edge of a total collapse. Contrary to the public image of Swiss banks as symbols of stability and careful management, Credit Suisse was everything but that. In recent years, the bank was bleeding money that it sank into bad investments, and it was battling a series of scandals, including involvement in money laundering, tax fraud, mismanagement of client funds, and bank executives that were spying on each other. As a result, by 2023, it was in a dire financial situation, and it was running out of money, but its biggest lenders refused to keep providing more cash, which sent the bank on the edge of bankruptcy. In the end, the Swiss government had to step in the last minute and force the largest Swiss bank, UBS, to buy Credit Suisse as the only possible way to prevent a complete meltdown of the entire Swiss financial system. But while Switzerland managed to dodge this bullet, this episode showed what shape the country's banking system is really in. The Swiss banks turned out to be just as badly managed and irresponsible with their clients' money as banks everywhere else. Their second largest bank and the entire banking system along with it nearly collapsed, which would have sent Switzerland into a worse crisis than the one in 2008. And instead of having two large banks, Switzerland now has one mega bank, which is not in a great shape either. And if the mega bank would collapse, it would take down the entire country along with it, which kinda makes the entire Swiss banking system pretty vulnerable. And that's not the end of the problems that the Swiss banks are facing. For centuries, Switzerland managed to benefit from conflicts that raged around it, thanks to its famous principle of neutrality, basically not choosing sides and remaining on good terms with everyone. But even that is not really working out anymore. While Swiss banks were known to do business with anyone, regardless of the geopolitical situation, they are now under increasing pressure to confiscate and hand over hundreds of billions of dollars that Russian oligarchs have stored in Swiss banks, or face sanctions if they refuse to do that. And most likely, they will sooner or later give in, which will further diminish the reputation of what a Swiss bank account used to mean, and provide another reason why people might want to put their money somewhere else instead. Now, does all this mean that the Swiss economy is facing an imminent collapse? Well, no. Apart from banking and finance, Switzerland still has many extremely successful companies that are not going anywhere, and the Swiss will probably continue to be a relatively wealthy country for a lot longer. longer, but chances are they will be not as wealthy as before. The banking sector is an extremely important part of the Swiss economy, and it has already been in a difficult spot after it lost its banking secrecy, which used to be a major competitive advantage. And now, after the embarrassing scandals and the fall of Credit Suisse, the stability of the Swiss banks is not guaranteed anymore either, meaning there are less and less reasons to put your money in a bank in Switzerland, while there are many other countries that offer a good amount of secrecy without all the annoying spotlight that Switzerland is now under. And so the reputation and fame of the Swiss banks, along with their massive profits, are more and more a thing of the past.